It's cold outside, and there's a new Cold War. So why wouldn't we discuss the old Cold War whilst we await the literature of the new one? Not that that literature is guaranteed to appear, as our first guest will no doubt testify. Getting access to secrets, even after the 30-year rule, has never been more difficult.
But there's nobody better to try than the indefatigable Tim Tate, who's made more films and written more books than any of our flyers on board the Sputnik. He is the author of, amongst many others, his new book, The Spy Who Was Left Out in the Cold, and he joins us. Now, let's clear a spy mystery up. First, Tim, this rather magnificent cover with a magnificent title worthy of Hemingway himself has a very different title in the United States and a different cover. Shall I say a simpler title in the United States? Is this a case of two countries divided by a common language?
It's two different publishing traditions, I think. The title in the US is Agent Sniper, which, as you say, is rather shorter and a bit pithier. But it's exactly the same book, exactly the same story, two publishing traditions, same language, different traditions, I guess.
Let's discuss the UK edition, which I've had the good fortune to pick up. It is the most fascinating story. Tell it in the American way, pithily.
It's the story of the least understood and yet most important spy of the Cold War period, a Polish intelligence officer who simultaneously worked for the KGB in Moscow called Michał Golianewski. And to most people, I think that's a name that will mean absolutely nothing. Yet he was the West's most valuable agent behind the Iron Curtain in the late 1950s. And then after he defected to the United States in the start of 1961, was an incredibly important defector. He exposed a total of 1,693 communist bloc spies to the West. And some of these were the biggest and most important spies that Moscow had at the time. So when I started working on the research for the book, I was thinking, how is it that we don't know more about this man?
Well, some of the people that he exposed are household names. George Blake, for example. The Krogers, for example.
The people he exposed, these weren't minnows. These weren't small fish in the murky pool of Cold War intelligence gathering. George Blake, as you say, the KGB's man inside MI6 for more than a decade. The Krogers and the whole Portland spy ring here in the UK, major spy ring which had been operating inside the Admiralty and giving Britain's naval secrets to Moscow for years under the noses of MI5, and they simply had no idea.
Is he perhaps better known in Poland?
One of the things I got hold of, and I'm incredibly grateful to Poland for this, was Golianewski's entire Polish intelligence service file. It's 1,100 pages of material, and it is the most extraordinary material. And yet, when I was talking to people in Poland, and I continue to talk to people in Poland, there's very little known about him there. And he's this, as I say, when I started working on this, I think, well, how is it that this vitally important spy is so little known? And the answer is that he has been deliberately, in my view, airbrushed from the history of the Cold War by the CIA and to a certain degree by British intelligence. And that was for the simple reason that he embarrassed them.
I wasn't clear. I haven't fully read the book yet, but I've been through it. Why he defected when he did, because he seemed to be still producing.
He approached the Americans in 1958 April 1958. And he did so anonymously using the code name. He gave himself the code name of Heffenschütz, which is the German word for sniper. He didn't say who he was or where he worked, and he sent this note anonymously. And he said, I will give you all these secrets, but you have to fulfill a couple of conditions. If you're interested, and this is classic spy stuff, put an advert in the personal columns of a German newspaper with these code words, and I will follow up. And for the next almost 3 years, anonymously, he fed all this material to the United States, hundreds upon hundreds of pages of top secret communist bloc intelligence and military material, as I say, always anonymously. And the US and Britain gratefully accepted this. It was a treasure trove. Come the end of 1960, thanks to incompetence on behalf of the CIA particularly, he was about to be caught by his masters in Polish intelligence and the Soviet KGB. And so he went on the run, literally on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, 1960. He fled from Warsaw to East Berlin, spent the next few days dodging surveillance from the Stasi and from communist bloc intelligence services, and finally defected with them on his heels to the US consulate on January the 4th, 1961. But he had to get out because he was going to be exposed. And if he was exposed, he would be executed.
As George said, you have written so many books, more than any of our other guests we've had on this show. But the subjects, they range from sport during World War I, women's football, child pornography, conman, even the girls in the red light district, and obviously the Cold War. You've written extensively about the Cold War, fiction and non-fiction. How do you come about to write about so many different subjects?
I'm an old journalist. I mean, it's what we do. People tell me stories and people say, have a look at this. And if it's a good story, that's the main starting point. But also for me, and I suppose I'm selfish in this, it's a question, is this a story that should be told? Is there something now which makes this story important to tell? And for all the titles you mentioned, but and particularly for Golianevsky, there is a real reason to tell this story, a reason in 2021 that this story is important. And that really is, I suppose, what my touchstone is.
I want to come back to the sniper. You used the word embarrassing. It is embarrassing when your plum agent reinvents himself as one of the Romanovs, as an heir to the throne of all the Russias. Was he just nuts, or was there a method in this madness?
Absolutely, it was embarrassing. And if anyone knows anything about Golianevsky, they probably have this vague memory that he was this nut who claimed to be Alexei Romanov, Last Tsarevich of all Russia. It was, at the time, and remains, an entirely fraudulent pretense. It was completely bogus. Was he mad at that point when he started claiming it? No, he wasn't. There was a much, much simpler motive for him, and that motive was greed. There was a long-standing belief in the US and elsewhere in the early 60s, and had been for decades, that the Tsar, before he was executed in Ekaterinburg, had stashed a large fortune outside Russia in banks in the US and in Europe. And by 1964, when Golianevsky goes public and says, "Oh, I'm the Tsarevich, I'm here," it was estimated to be around $200 to $400 million. That's in the billions today. Now, frankly, there's no proof this fortune ever existed, but it's very clear from the documents I accessed that what drove Golianevsky initially was, I can get my hands on that money.
Gayatri, in her introduction, inferred that there might not be a treasure trove of literature about the new Cold War that there undoubtedly is about the old, because they're guarding their secrets for longer and better. Is that a worry you have for future Tim Tates?
Absolutely. As Gayatri mentioned, on this book, I accessed this Golianevsky's Polish intelligence service file. After some struggle, I managed to prize out a large number of pages, or a significant number of pages, of his CIA file and some FBI files. I asked MI5, because he was very important for MI5, please, can I have his MI5 file? This is, bear in mind, he defected 60 years ago. And MI5 finally came back to me and said, yeah, we've got a file on him, but you can't have it. We're not releasing it because of the continuing sensitivity of the material contained with it. Now, that is ludicrous. What continuing sensitivity can there be 6 decades after the man defected and 3 decades after the fall of the communist bloc, which he served? What I think it speaks to, and I think this is what you are getting at, is there is an absurd addiction to secrecy in this country. And this administration, in particular, Johnson administration, has been even more zealous in refusing to release files which should, by law, have been released years ago, to researchers and writers like me. So for people who come after me, good luck, because it's getting worse, not better.
Long may your pen run, Tim Tate. Thank you very much for joining us on board the Sputnik.
Thank you for having me.